I just want to pick up, though, from that to another concern that young India might have, which is income inequalities, which have grown. An Oxfam report says that the top 30% in this country owns over 90% of India's wealth. And the top 10% own over 72% of the wealth. And the richest 5%, about 62% of the wealth. Jayant Sinha, as a man of finance, is a man who comes from Hazaribagh, one of the poorer parts of the country in Jharkhand. Is this something that worries you? One worry has been pointed out by Dr. Tharoor, religious divisions. The other is income inequality. Is that a challenge going ahead, looking into 2047?
Rajdeep, in the last few years, we've virtually ended extreme poverty in India, and that's what many international observers are saying right now. The Honorable Prime Minister, in his very eloquent speech yesterday, laid out a number of statistics that indicate that we made remarkable progress in ending poverty and ending the markers of poverty, which is lack of access to education, lack of access to healthcare, hunger. As you know, through the COVID pandemic and thereafter, we have been providing free grains to 80 crore people. So we have been able to provide, which has never been done before. This is very important for young people to understand. This has never been done before, that we can now provide support, sustenance into people's bank accounts and through the public distribution system directly into their homes in a way which has never been accomplished before, because we've been doing it so efficiently. So we've ended extreme poverty. We have been able to create job opportunities. We've been able to provide good education to young people. So we are rapidly creating opportunities for everyone. So of course, income inequality is reducing. Income inequality is something that we are working on. And across the world, there are important forces at work that actually make it difficult to be able to deal with the concentration of wealth that is happening. And those are driven by globalization, they're driven by technology and so on. This trend that you're talking about the very narrowing and concentration of wealth at the very top, not even the 1%, but the 0.001%, is driven by certain very dramatic global factors, as I said, like globalization and technology, which we are subject to like everyone else. But the important point, that for India's 140 crore people, we have created a safety net. That is something that has never ever been done before in a country at the scale and scope that India has accomplished over the last few years.
So you deny that there is concentration of wealth. You're saying people have been lifted from poverty, which is fair enough. And it's happened not just in the last 9 years. Let's also be fair. It's been happening over the last 29 years post-liberalization. But you agree that there is too much of concentration of wealth in a few hands even today in this country?
I don't subscribe to that, Rajdeep, because if you look at the number of unicorns that have been created, the number of millionaires and billionaires that have been created, those numbers are staggering, those numbers are extraordinary. So I don't subscribe to the view that we have this very incredible concentration at the top. I think that there is a rising tide that's lifting all boats.
Well, I don't agree with that, Rajdeep, as you can well imagine. First of all, under the UPA government, of which in the second term I was a part, we pulled out, and these are not challenged figures, 270 million people from below the poverty line above it. Sadly, during the demonetization carried out by Jayant's friends in government, we ended up pushing 150 million people back down again below the poverty line, with a number of lakhs and lakhs of micro and small enterprises shutting down because their liquidity disappeared overnight, and most of them never reopening. You also found a situation where the highest figures for unemployment ever recorded since we started keeping numbers in the late 1930s happened 2 years ago in this country. The COVID lockdown didn't help either, and the way in which our migrant workers suffered trudging barefoot or in slippers back to their home villages because the lockdown had been announced with no warning, the only country in the world where no warning was given. So there was no time for any arrangements to be made to house or feed our migrant workers. They all went back in terrible circumstances. When we look at these situations, people being treated callously, decisions being made that impacted the poor and the poorest of the poor, unemployment going up so people don't have the hope of something better, and at the same time, inflation has been recorded. We've seen, all of you, I'm sure, have been hearing stories about the price of tomatoes. For even longer, we've been hearing about the rising prices of fuel, petrol and diesel, even when they were plummeting around the world because our government was piling taxes on top of it to cover their costs. All of this has made life very difficult for the so-called Aam Aadmi. Now, the macro picture, I don't disagree. Unicorns may well be created. We probably created far more than any other country, I think. But the fact is, those are unicorns because they're $1 billion worth, each of them. How many Indians do you think? 0.0000, how many percent? So we're not looking at anything that helps the large mass of people, the average Indian, the so-called Aam Aadmi.
You know, but I must say this to you, Dr. Tharoor. It's not as if the price of tomatoes only rose when the BJP is in power.
They
when
rose
you were
more.
in power also, the price of, you see, let's be clear.
Look, I'm a tomato fan.
In inflation,
price of onions also went up under BJP.
Inflation wasn't discovered in 2014. You see, the problem with having politicians from either side is you give a very partisan perspective. When I give these figures about income inequalities, this is a reality that has existed in this country for 7 decades.
No, it's actually got worse, Raj. These are measurable facts and figures. In fact, I'd like to know why the government... No, you can measure it. Inequality is worse in our country. It's also happened to China. Inequality is bad in China too. So it's not as if we are unique. But we do have rising inequality, and all the figures have shown this. One of the worries we have is that suddenly the government hasn't been conducting some of the statistical operations that give us reliable data, that used to give us reliable data. We haven't had a census. For the first time since 1841, there hasn't been a census in this decade so far. And we wonder when and if it's going to be, because now we hear it won't be till after the general elections. We don't have a number of the statistical exercises. We don't even have a chief statistician. He's been fired. So we're worried a little bit about the reliability of the figures. But inasmuch as the experts can estimate with accurate numbers, we are doing worse on the yardstick that you asked about, which is inequality. We're doing worse on poverty. We're doing worse on hunger. The Global Hunger Index is considered a widely reliable figure. Our rates have dropped there. In other words, child malnutrition has gone up, and particularly in so-called prosperous states like Gujarat, the figures are shocking. And you're looking at a situation where these numbers are bad. I believe very much in painting a picture of hope and optimism, because that's basically who I am. The proverbial glass being half full and half empty, I prefer to see it not only as half full, but as refillable. We've got to be able to try better. We haven't got it right. We've got to be able to fill that glass up. So I want to say to all of you, I want you to have a better future. But we're not going to get there until we look at the reality of the present time.
India's #1 political reporter.
Defines what seems to be happening, vendetta politics. कोई दूध के से धुला हुआ नहीं है.
Unmatched eye. Unmatched experience.
The world has changed. My black hair has become grey as well.
And with unmatched passion for the story.
Do not monopolize the conversation.
When it's 100% news that matters. It's News Today with Rajdeep Sardesai. Monday to Friday, 9 p.m. Only on India Today TV.